Hey guys, this is Paul Del Vecchio, and today we're going to be going over part 2 of compositing phone reflections in After Effects. So we'll be creating this. So you can see the ghost reflection is in the phone, and also we'll be creating this. A fake phone screen, animated timer, and the battery screen. So let's jump right in. So here we have our footage plate. And I've marked which sections of the footage that we're going to use by putting these markers in. And basically, to add a marker, you can select the layer and hit asterisk on the number pad, and that'll add that, or you can hold shift and use any of the numbers along the top of the regular portion of the keyboard. So that's just a quick tip on staying organized and putting in markers. So I've marked the cut points in the edit with these markers, but I like to give myself a little bit of room on the head and the tail of the clip, so that's why we have a little bit extra here. So I'm going to take our footage plate and drop it into a new comp, and I'm just going to step into our footage plate and just mark off where the cut points are. So there's one there, and step out, and there's another one there. So anything before or after this is going to be extra, so we won't have to really worry too much about that. And I'm just going to give myself 12 frames extra on the end here. Trim this comp, and that's looking good. So the first thing I want to do here is take out the tracking markers. And just so you know, we're working in a UHD 4K comp, 23976 frames per second. So I'm just going to select my footage and go over to Mocha. Okay, so here we are in Mocha, and the first thing I'm going to do is track the screen. So I'm just going to come in here and draw a shape around the screen. And actually, I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit so we can actually see what we're doing. And I'm going to track backwards. And I'm going to go back to that keyframe. And now I'm going to track forward. I like to use Mocha for something like this because it's very accurate. It's just easier to do tracks like this in Mocha. There's so many tools that are available inside Mocha that it's a superior tracking tool. I definitely recommend it. Okay, so now that this track is done, I'm just going to scrub through it just to make sure there's no slippage and to make sure that it held on to the track. And that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a planar surface onto the phone, and this works based off of the track. So I'm just going to put these into the four corners of the image, and this is going to generate the corner pin effect that we're going to use to superimpose the phone screen onto the screen of this phone here. And I'm going to bring up a grid, and then you can kind of see that the grid is aligned to the surface, and if we scrub through it, you can see that it's tracked on there pretty well. And you can see that as I move that corner, that changes the alignment of the grid, so you can use the grid as kind of a judgment to see if your corner pin is lining up with the phone screen. So I'm going to zoom in and make sure that the planar surface edges are right on the corners. This is just going to ensure that the corners are in the right spot, and that the phone screen, once it's superimposed, is going to end up in the right spot. So you really want to be exact when you're doing this, and you want to make sure that the edges are exactly where you want the phone screen edges to be. Now I can place the grid on there and see if it lines up, see if it holds on to the track. And it's looking good. It's looking like it's on there and it's not slipping or anything. So we're in a good spot right here. But we're not done yet. What we need to do is track the tracking markers that are on the screen so that we can take them out. So we'll have to put splines around each one so that we can take them out later in After Effects. So we want to come in here and lay in these marks, and we want to make sure that we're not getting any overlap onto the frame of the phone right there. So we don't want that, because what we're going to do is generate After Effects masks from this, and those are going to subtract what's inside of that spline. So if you have it on the frame of the phone, then the frame of the phone is going to be subtracted, and we don't want that. We just want the tracking markers only to be subtracted from the image. So we're just going to go through and lay these on here, taking care to make sure that the splines are not overlapping with the frame of the phone. So make sure you name the layers here so you can stay organized. This last one has a little bit of there's a little mark right there, so we're just going to draw a spline around that mark as well so we can get rid of it and we don't have to worry about that messing up the key. And then we're just going to track this. Now I'm checking to see if the splines shifted at all and if they overlap with the phone frame, and they don't. So that's good. And another thing you want to do is make sure you check perspective. I didn't do that on the first part of the track, but that's okay because there wasn't too much of a perspective change, but you just want to make sure that you check perspective so that if there is a shift in the direction of the phone or the perspective of the phone, that it takes that into account. It just makes the tracking more accurate. I'm just going to scrub through it just to make sure that there was no slippage, and it looks like it's good. Again, you want to make sure that the masks or the splines don't overlap with the frame of the phone, and we're not getting that. All the layers are named, so when we jump back into After Effects, we know what we're looking at. And I'm just going to save this and jump back to After Effects. Okay, so here we are back in After Effects. So I'm just going to really concentrate on the portion of the footage that we are using. So I'm just going to set an in and out point for the comp and just worry about this section here. And I'm going to open up the Mocha plugin a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is generate mattes. So I'm just going to view the matte, and then I'm going to select our visible layers, and you can kind of see now that all of those show up. But what we really want to see is the roto layers, or the layers that are going to remove the tracking markers. So I'm just going to uncheck screen track because we don't want to see that one yet. And there we go. We have these layers, which if I switch back and turn off view matte, you can see that they cover up the tracking markers themselves. So I do realize this footage is a little dark, so I'm just going to pump this up a little bit so we can see. This is just an exposure for the comp window in After Effects. So for the next step, we want to generate the AE masks. So basically this is kind of rotoing for us. Again, we're going to check our visible layers, and we see that these are just the tracking markers. Again, we do not want to see the screen track, so we turn it off because that's going to generate a mask for the screen track, and that's not what we want. We just want a mask around the tracking markers. Once those are selected and set up correctly, I'm going to hit Create AE Masks. If I hit U on the keyboard, you can see that we have keyframes for the masks. You can see that they follow. That's exactly what we want, but it's not set up correctly. So what we want to do is change this to subtract for all the masks, and now they've been cut out. So we're just going to import our reflection renders. So we're going to select the first one, make sure PNG sequence is activated, import as footage, and we're going to hit import. And that imports all the still frames as one piece of footage. But before I drop this into the comp, I'm going to open up the interpret footage settings, and you'll see here that the frame rate, the assumed frame rate, is at 30 frames per second, and that's wrong. So we have to change it manually to 23.976. And now we'll be able to use this. If we dropped it in without doing that, then the reflections would be off and they wouldn't track with the movement of the phone. I'm going to take our reflection pass and put it underneath the phone. Okay, so we have to key out the green here. So I'm just going to go to Effects, Keying, and Keylight, and I'm going to take our eyedropper and key out the green. So if we look at this closely, we see there's a bunch of noise that we need to clean up, and there's a lot. So the first step in doing this is just opening up our screen matte controls and switching our view to screen matte. And we can see here that in the black there's a lot of noise, so we can clip the black. A setting of 30 works pretty well, and then I'm also going to clip the white. 80 works pretty well for that. And I'm going to switch our replace method to source. Now before I do that, I'm going to switch back to final result so we can see what this is doing. So you can see here there's a lot of noise. So if we switch this to source, it gets rid of all that noise, but then we have this kind of like crunchy edge, and we have the spill from the green. But we can fix those. So for the edge, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this screen pre-blur to 1.5, and then I'm going to blur the edge a little bit, and I can do that with screen softness, and I'm just going to set that to 2, and that kind of softens that edge a little bit. So if I just jump back and forth, you can kind of see it's a little bit of a rough edge, a hard edge, and softening it helps us get rid of that chattery noise that we got on that edge there. So that's good. Now I want to double check our matte real quick, and that's looking good. And this little patch here we don't have to worry about because we've rotoed that with one of these layers here, so everything within this is going to disappear when we jump back to the final result, so that's fine. We can see here that there's the spill, and we're going to get rid of that. We're going to go to Effect, Keying, Advanced Spill Suppressor. The default settings don't work well, so what we're going to have to do is switch from Standard to Ultra, and that actually cleans it up pretty well. I'm just going to leave that because I think that works pretty well, but another trick we can do is actually turn off the effects and then take our key color here and sample what's on the screen, and that'll help clean that up. And once we turn the effects back on, you can see that that helped clean it up. Now we do have a little bit of a black edge over here, so we're going to have to clean that up as well. So let's go to Effect, Matte, and Simple Choker. We can do 1 pixel to start, and that cleans up a lot of it, so that's pretty good. I could probably do a little more, like 1.25, and I'm good with that. So that's looking pretty good. So here we have the reflection layer, and then we have our footage. So what we need now is that iPhone screen. Let's take a look at the original that I did. So that's that. And I'm just going to copy a bunch of these layers. Basically, they're just text layers. And what I did was I went in and I used a font that looked the same. So if we look at our character, I used Helvetica New 45 Light for connected. And also, I believe, for 911, yes. And for the counter as well. And then for the time, I don't know if you caught that, 3:33 a.m. But for the time, it's actually Helvetica New Medium. So that's the only one that's different. And the reason why I did that was because if you look at the original image, it matches that a little bit better. You can see this is a little bit thicker than this. So I'm going to grab these text layers because there's no point in me generating them again. And I'm going to take our iPhone screen and I'm going to drop it into a new comp. And this is kind of what I got. Now, if we do a little research, we can find out that the iPhone 8 screen is 1080 by 1920 resolution. So let's bring that up. Just a quick Google search, and we came up with the iPhone 8 Plus is 1920 by 1080. Obviously, it's 1080 by 1920 if we do width first. So we got to change the comp to those settings. So 20. And there we go. So I'm just going to transform this to fit the height of the comp. So fit to comp height. And then I can just slide this over. Now I'm going to zoom in to make sure that we don't get any weird edges here. And let's check the other side, and no weirdness there, so we're all set. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of a lot of this information here. Now make sure you're on the first frame here, and double click on it, so bring up the layer. And we're going to take the clone stamp tool, sample this, and just start painting this out. Sample. Just painting it out. And what I'm doing is I'm holding Alt, and then I'm clicking up here, and it's sampling from there. And now when I click, you can see that it's telling me where it's sampling from as I move it. So that's pretty helpful. Let's take out the carrier. And the reason why I said make sure you're on the first frame is that if you didn't, then this would start from the frame that you were on. And that's good. Okay, so our cleanup is complete. I'm just going to shrink that down. And I'm going to paste in our text layers. There's not really too much here to say. You just kind of want to design a screen that looks however you want, basically. One thing, though, is that there's a timer here. So I want to show you how that works. So that's basically just an expression I downloaded from MotionScript. So if I go in here and I open this up and I run this script called timer, you can see that it sets up a timer. And we want to change the hours, minutes, and seconds. So the hours will set to 0, minutes will set to 0, because at this point she's only been on the phone for about 10 seconds, so we'll change the seconds to 10. Now the speed is set at 500 for some reason, and that's just way too fast. So what we're going to do, and if I control click, you can see that in the span of 1 second, it's 8.5 seconds. So what we want to do is change the speed from 500 to 1. And then you'll see every second the number will increase. Okay, so now that we've designed that, we can jump back to our main comp. The problem with, and it's not really a problem, but the thing to remember is that when you track something in Mocha, it takes the resolution of the image into account in order to generate the corner pinpoints. So if we apply the tracking data corner pins to an image that's not the size of the footage that we tracked, it's not going to work properly. So in other words, if we track footage that's 3840 by 2160, which is UHD, we can't apply that to an HD piece of footage and expect the tracking to be correct. And I'll show you that. So I'm just going to drop in this phone comp. And if we drop the phone screen into our comp, we can see here that obviously it's not 3840 by 2160. It's 1080 by 1920. So again, our original comp here, our footage comp is 3840 by 2160. And if we jump into our iPhone screen here, we can see that The composition size is 1080 by 1920 because that's the resolution of an iPhone screen. So what we need to do is take our iPhone screen and pre-comp it. And we're going to move all attributes into new composition, and this is iPhone screen for tracking data. And I'm going to open that up. Now, you can see that the screen is within a 3840 by 2160 comp, but that's not enough. We need to make sure that the screen itself is 3840 by 2160 so that it gets placed into the correct position. So what we have to do is right-click on the layer, go to Transform, and click Fit to Comp. And that'll expand it out and stretch it out and make it look all weird. But when we jump back into the main comp, you can see that it's the size of the main comp, which is 3840 by 2160, so it's stretched out. So if we click on our original footage plate and go to the tracking data, so we can select here, create track data, and we can make sure that only the screen track is selected. Hit OK, and we want to make sure that this is set to corner pin, support motion blur, and that we specify the layer here. So this is iPhone screen for tracking. If I hit apply, it's going to put it right in the exact spot. If I just throw a copy of the original iPhone screen in here, and I'm going to turn off that tracked screen. If we just try to apply the tracking data to this, you can see that it's way off, and then we'll have to go back in and reposition it, and it still might be off, so we're not going to do that. Now you can see here that her finger is underneath the screen, so what we can do is, because the rest of the screen is keyed, we can drop this below the footage plate. And so that's good. And so now that's in place, and what we can do is actually drop down the transparency, so 80%, just so it's not as bright. Maybe we'll do 75. And then you can see the reflection underneath kind of peeking through. But we can take the phone screen itself and add a glow to it. That's too much, so we're just going to knock this down to 0.1. And actually, let me bring that back up to 1 so I can adjust the glow radius. So that's pretty good, and I'm going to knock that down to 0.1. And then I'm just going to add a blur because the screen itself is just too sharp. So I'm going to add a blur. Let's just do a fast box blur. We can do camera lens blur, and that's a better blur. It just looks better. It looks more realistic. But for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to use fast box blur 0.1. And let's turn that on and off. That's looking good. Let's change our resolution to full so we can see it. That's looking good. It just gives us a little bit of blur to blend in with the rest of the footage. Now, the reflection itself, we can take that and place that on top of the phone screen. And then we can change the transfer mode to screen. And all that basically means is that the darker points are opaque and the lighter points are a little bit transparent. So we can knock down the opacity to 15. That's good. And that's going to blend it better. Now remember, we have a little bit of an exposure adjustment on the comp, so at this point let's bring it back down to 0. And that's looking good. So let's play this out and take a look what we have. So that's pretty cool. One of the things I did in the original was include this dead battery icon, and basically all it is a switch over. So in this comp, the stretched out comp, it's just a hard cut between the phone screen and the battery icon. And that's a good thing about having things put into one comp like that rather than stacking all the different elements, is that I can just do a switch over like this really fast and easy. So it's just a bunch of drawn lines, it's shape layers, and here is just a box, so this is, or a rectangle actually, and then I just used the fill for the alpha channel. And the lines are just simple shape layers. So I got rid of the fill, so it's just the stroke, and then I just drew a rectangle. I went into the rectangle properties and adjust the roundness. So that rounds off the corners. I increased the stroke thickness so that it fits more to what the battery icon looks like. And then for the nub at the beginning, it's just another shape layer. Same deal. It's a box, pretty much, with rounded edges. So just go in and round off the corners. Reposition it. And there you go. So that's it. Pretty simple. So that's basically it. Stay tuned for more breakdowns. I'm going to be doing a lighting and color breakdown for this film, and also if there are any more visual effects shots, then I'll break those down. I think the last shot is the only one, but that one's pretty simple, so I don't know if that really requires a breakdown. But anyway, thanks for watching. This is Paul Del Vecchio. Email me if you have any questions, or hit me up, paul@pauldv.net, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Stay tuned. Bye.